we're going to Elizabeth Holmes, who gave her first prison interview to People magazine. If you're in a relationship with someone who's in jail, get him out. Get him out. Start
Get
lobbying.
him out. Start with the People magazine feature.
Exactly. And the media is the immediate precursor to actually drawing enough attention to get on the presidential pardon docket. It worked for Ross Ulbricht. And who knows, maybe it'll work for Elizabeth. Let's go to Dan Primack. He says, Elizabeth Holmes prison interview. He shares the link, 12 likes, 13 retweets, clearly nerfed in the algorithm, but built different. He posted it anyway. Feedback to this post, not great. Lots of people say, seems like she wants to copy paste the Ross Ulbricht playbook. Another guy says, we don't care, but we're different on the show. We do care. So we're going to read it to you. Elizabeth Holmes breaks her silence in first interview from prison. It's been hell and torture. The former Theranos CEO, convicted of fraud, shares her details of her life behind bars and separation from her family. And so let's go through some of this. I'll read a couple paragraphs. Then I want your hot take, Jordy. Twice a week for a few fleeting hours, life is sweet for the 41-year-old Elizabeth Holmes. It's when her kids, William 3 and Invicta 2, snuggle in her lap and talk excitedly about insect, ant farms, and sea creatures. Her son builds Legos and her daughter dismantles them. Seemingly unaware of the beeping of metal detectors and the watchful eyes of guards at federal prison camp Bryan in Texas, the children and their father, Holmes' partner Billy Evans, 33, enjoy each moment together. And like always, their most recent visit ended with a ritual when their time was up. The children pressed their fingers together to make a heart sign, saying in unison, "Mommy, this is our love," to which their mother responded, "Our love is a superpower." Watching them leave through the secured glass door that separates her from freedom shatters my world every single time, says Holmes. The people I love the most have to walk away as I stand here, a prisoner, and my reality sinks in. Rough. What do you think, Jordy?
Super rough. She, I don't know the full backstory and the full sort of timeline on when exactly she decided or, ended up having children. But, part of this positioning, it did, there was sort of a narrative that she was actually, interested, part of the idea of like, let's have a bunch of kids, was potentially oriented around building this narrative that, hey, I'm a mom, you're taking me away from like my young children, which is ignore all the facts and the circumstances. Just the nature of being a mom, separated from her young children is deeply tragic. You have kids, I have kids. The idea, my kids, I can noticeably see them not doing so well after literally 2 hours away from mom. And like for our youngest, and I'm sure you're two. Yeah. Even like they're just in a better mood. Like they're just doing better when mom is in their orbit. And so before we get into any of the sort of analysis or the facts or the sort of takes, I would just say that it's, irrespective of what, Holmes, did and the crimes that she committed, it's just a very sad situation.
She's 41 now. She's served 2 years of an 11.25 year sentence that's been reduced to 9 years. So she has 7 more years, but she was 39 when she was convicted and sent off to this 9-year stint. What are you going to do? You wait 9 years, you're probably not going to be able to have kids at all. So
that's true.
There is this, like, I understand where the narrative came from of like, oh, she did this on purpose to like win curry favor. But at the same time, like having kids before you're 40 is just generally advisable. So it's not that crazy of an idea, even though obviously it's turmoil while you're in the clink. So she is serving a 9-year sentence for fraud and conspiracy over the collapse of Theranos, the billion-dollar biotech corporation she founded. She is speaking out for the first time in a prison interview conducted in a cold visitation room furnished with vending machines and blue plastic chairs. Gone are the black turtlenecks and crimson lipstick she wore when she dazzled Silicon Valley and the national media as a bold CEO of a startup. Her company promised to revolutionize the healthcare industry with cheap diagnostic testing and devices able to screen patients for hundreds of diseases times with a few drops of blood. Now she wears drab khaki prison garb with her blonde hair pulled back, bare makeup, and a silver cross around her neck, speaking in a voice notably softer than the throaty baritone she was known for. I'm not the same person I was back then, says Holmes, who pleaded not guilty at her trial and maintains her innocence today, albeit while vaguely acknowledging there are things I would have done differently on her path to lockup. It's surreal. People who have never met me before believe so strongly about me. They don't understand who I am. It forces you to spend a lot of time questioning belief and hoping the truth will prevail. I am walking by faith and ultimately the truth. But it's been hell and torture in here. At 20, she dropped out of Stanford her sophomore year to focus on developing healthcare technology on a mission to save lives. In 2003, she launched Theranos, which secured a $9 billion valuation in a decade. Hailed as the next Steve Jobs and backed by investors such as Rupert Murdoch and the family behind Walmart, Holmes became the youngest self-made billionaire in 2014. But following the publication of an expose in the Wall Street Journal that questioned the accuracy of the company's testing technology, a federal probe led to the indictment of Holmes and her fellow executive, Sunny Balwani, her secret boyfriend at the time, on charges of misleading investors and defrauding them, along with patients, for hundreds of millions of dollars. Very rough situation.
Really rough. Ultimately, I don't think it makes sense in this context to try to psychoanalyze her too much, right? And I do believe that her going to prison and have to be every single day face to face with the reality that her freedom was taken away because of things that she did, right? She admits that she would have done things differently. If you look at the approach that she took, she applied the move fast and break things methodology that was popularized by, in that era by, Mark Zuckerberg and other, founders, but applied it to healthcare in a scenario where human life was on the line and healthcare outcomes were on the line. And it's just, there's totally a world where she was building SaaS or a social media app, and it actually, it's much easier to visualize a SaaS app in your mind, and if you have billions of dollars, you'll be able to execute against that. And I do believe that she clearly visualized this future of being able to test for all these different things with a single drop of blood. I believe that she firmly, believed in that and genuinely felt that she could execute against that with the right amount of resources. But over time, it just became obvious that, and I believe is widely sort of known at this point, but it's worth restating, this was not a Silicon Valley startup, despite being started out of Stanford, right? Like the investors were people like Rupert Murdoch and a lot of the best, biotech funds in Silicon Valley passed on the company. And in the short term, their LPs were probably telling them, what are you guys doing? How did you miss this one? And they were ultimately proven right. But, in the scenario where she was building a consumer mobile app or SaaS, she would have been able to actually execute against the product. But then clearly her and the rest of the executive team, made decisions along the way that were just, deeply wrong, right? In terms of shipping things that they knew weren't working, trying to continue to execute on big partnerships that they had. It was CVS that they had major, or was it Walgreens or CVS? I forget. But ultimately, series of just like very bad decisions. And she's experiencing the consequences of those now. I don't know it's hard for me to see a scenario where Trump has some big incentive to, pardon her. I don't see that path. Maybe, we can get into it in a little bit, but doesn't seem like a very straight line, right? There's not a, what she wants to apply the Ross Ulbricht playbook, but to understand the Ross Ulbricht playbook, you have to understand that every single libertarian, maximalist was backing Ross for years and years and years with huge amounts of resources and active boots on the ground in Washington. And, it was not it was basically, when did Ross actually get convicted and go to prison?
He was in prison for 10 years, essentially.
Yeah. So it's
and
like,
she'd be out by the time that playbook ran through.
Yeah. So even if she had that type of backing, it might still take a decade and then she'd be out anyway. So I think that she seems to be very motivated by the spotlight. I know that she's already working on it's either a series or a movie, like a non-documentary, like a sort of drama on the situation.
She's involved?
Yeah.
How is she involved? She's in prison.
No, I'm just saying she's like approved it and she's working.
Yeah, like sold life rights or something. Interesting.
The main documentary was so bad that there's a scenario where if she does it actually more a drama sort of fictionalized a little bit, it would come out better.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million ways that the Theranos story could have gone differently. Obviously, using the tier 1 venture funds as a true gating mechanic, or the biotech funds as a gating mechanic. And there's often this time, this happens a lot with founders where they get turned down by all the best VCs in their industry. And they say, I'm built different. I still need to go raise a ton of money. And then they raise from unsophisticated investors. And then the business plan doesn't work out. And it turns out that the tier 1s actually saw something, a flaw in the business model that would only be realized later. Now, sometimes, tier 1s turn down and you go and you build your own thing and everything works out perfectly.
No, we talked about this, with OpenAI, right? A lot of people turn down OpenAI because they're like, this is like the most weird rationalist, nonprofit, if we can't make this work. We like the team, we like the vision, but this model doesn't work for us. In this situation, it was more so on the actual diligence side. So, people love to talk poorly about VCs for lacking doing proper diligence on opportunities. But in this case, I really do think it was, hey, this woman is clearly compelling, Stanford dropout, highly motivated. She clearly is very talented at fundraising, but ultimately people are like, I want to believe that this is possible, but everyone is telling us, people have been, I think this was one of those things, like, the entire medical industry, healthcare industry would have been incentivized to make this tech work for decades, right? And there's probably been, thousands of studies and experiments to attempt to make this possible. And so I'm imagining people looked at this and said, hey, this has actually been tried before. And that's ultimately oftentimes why VCs pass, right? I was looking at a company yesterday with a buddy, and I'm like, look, here's a very clear example of like a better iteration of this idea and a more stacked team with more funding. And it didn't work for these reasons. Like, you need to show me why this new team is going to be able to do, the same thing and actually make it work. Right. Yeah.
I mean, so many different ways to build a business that looks somewhat like the mission of Theranos without getting over your skis. We're seeing this with Function and Superpower now, where blood testing clearly is a real market, and they act as almost like wrappers on top of Quest Labs and LabCorp. Now, those companies do seem to have some sort of cornered resource or some sort of monopoly over the actual physical lab space. And so no startup's been really able to break in there. But I also know a guy who started a medical device company, got it approved, and it was a box that did a diagnostic, and he sold it into doctors' offices. And the value prop was very simple. It was, if you're a doctor and you want to test for this blood marker, normally you would have to send it out. But instead, you can buy this machine. It's expensive, but you can bring that CapEx internally. Maybe there's some financing there, but in general, you do that test on site, gets you rapid results, and it's approved. And he eventually sold that company to Roche Pharmaceuticals for hundreds of millions of dollars. And it was just like a very clean, by the book, one marker. They built the box, they sold it. It was great, great outcome for everyone. And Theranos clearly could have done that. Or they could have they could have started by wrapping, LabCorp. If they wanted to go the consumer direction, they could have done a bunch of different things. It was clearly just that she was telling this okay, we're going to be able to do so much with so little blood. And my like hot take on this was always that, so she was fearful of blood draws. And so she wanted to be able to do a ton of diagnostics with just one pinprick of like finger blood, but there's just not enough. And like kind of the laws of physics come in and essentially break it down. It's maybe theoretically possible, but it's like clearly a massive engineering challenge. And my problem was just that I think that's a skill issue, and I think like you should just kind of man up and just give a bunch of blood. And every time I go in to get blood labs, I'm just like, take 6 vials, whatever. Like I'm fine, and it doesn't bother me. And I think building for that narrow audience of people who are fearful about giving blood is like maybe the wrong motivation, but it's very emotional. And so you could see a lot of investors saying, hey, I happen to have the same thing. I don't like giving 6 vials of blood just to know my testosterone levels and my
this was
cholesterol
some of the pushback on companies like Function and Superpower from investors early on is, hey, you have this cool consumer product, this consumer app that you're building, but it's dependent on getting customers to actually physically go to a lab and give 6 vials of blood. Conversion is going to be tough on that. And the other thing, for women to actually get accurate blood biomarkers, they need to go at a specific time of the month due to their cycle. So if you go at the wrong time, then you're getting a way different hormone profile than maybe is baseline. So
there's also a lot of like over self-diagnosis with a lot of these blood metric companies. Like you could imagine, okay, you're just testing yourself every single day and you're freaking out because like one day your cholesterol is a little higher than usual, and so you're doing some crazy intervention and you're not living a life that's like just in tune with yourself. And kind of, it's like that Will Menitis quote about like you should be able to just like, how do you feel?
Right? Is that Dr. Bill Menitis?
Yeah, Dr. Bill Menitis, the world-renowned expert. But there is something to that where if you give the patient you can give them actually too much data, and then they become hypochondriacs, and then they freak out every time some metric slides off just slightly. So little bit of trouble.
It's such an interesting scenario where all of humanity should have desperately wanted Theranos to work, right?
Yeah.
It clearly would have just been such a fantastic innovation that would have saved, countless lives and enabled, much better, biomarker analysis. And you could have argued, I'm sure she was in pitch meetings like, when we roll this out, we're going to be able to increase humanity's lifespan on average by 6 years or something like that, because we're going to be able to do early detection for all this stuff. And, now it's almost, over 20 years later from when she founded the company.
Yeah.
If we're still doing the same thing. And the same, the other thing is one of the challenges with having to take so much blood to get, these actual real analysis done is because labs are a snapshot of you in that exact moment, right? So I've gone in and I've done testing sometimes, and I'm like, wow, my testosterone is like falling off of a cliff.
Yeah. Because you were just fasted or something. Yeah.
And then I go, the next 3 months later, and it's back up to, beyond what my expectation was.
Through the super physiological levels, you're at like 3,000.
And so it's a very sad situation where, FTX going away didn't really impact anything other than, cause customer damage.
Yeah.
But and you could argue like there's people that were rooting for it to fail because they were saying, oh, we only have 5 engineers and we're worth $40 billion. You remember that was part of the FTX narrative, is they were like, we have basically our technical team is like 5 people.
Wow.
And in the opposite situation with Theranos, it's like everybody should wish that this worked. And I would hope that somebody pulls this off, and whoever eventually does this will be an absolute legend.
Yeah.
Right?
I just think it'll be a much more iterative approach. It'll be, Okay.
One,
We made, we
yeah,
made the big aluminum machine a little bit smaller. And then
yeah,
it went from, the lab, like warehouse, like facility into the doctor's office. And then eventually it goes in the trunk of a car that a phlebotomist can come to your house and do a draw and
yeah,
turn around really quickly. And then eventually, it's like the size of a toaster and you can get it, but you got to iterate through those. Jumping straight
yeah,
from, a pint of blood or something, or to just one drop, clearly like a very bold ambition, like great visual pitch, but
yeah,
unfortunately just too much from a science and engineering
yeah,
perspective. Let's keep reading her interview. Holmes is still processing the downfall that wiped away her entire fortune, and she considers her trial and conviction in a San Jose courtroom in 2022 to be a miscarriage of justice. First, it was about accepting it happened, says Holmes, about her relationship with Balwani. Then it was about forgiving myself for my own part, and I refused to plead guilty to crimes I did not commit. Theranos failed, but failure is not fraud. On the stand, doctors and patients testified that blood tests Holmes developed and marketed were a healthcare scam. One woman claimed the test results showed she had a miscarriage when she was actually pregnant. Another patient was told he might have prostate cancer when he didn't. A third received a false HIV diagnosis. And this is where the rubber meets the road with the Theranos harm
yeah,
that the
yeah,
move fast and break things ideology. If you're building a social app or an NFT project, like people could lose money, people could have some weird thing happen on the internet, the app doesn't work or whatever. Your ChatGPT, you get some hallucinated response, but this is like real impact
yeah,
on
and
health and wellness.
yeah, and to just giving her the benefit, a little credit. Misdiagnosis happens every single day, right? I'm sure there's millions
Yeah.
just in the US, maybe not millions, but could be something like there's 300,000, misdiagnosed patients per day in America or whatever, just spitballing, right?
Yeah.
But these kind of things happen at a much lower rate than her product, which was so unreliable. It was unethical to let patients
Yeah.
in life or death scenarios, right? This guy uh, thinks he might have prostate cancer
Yeah.
based on the results of this,
Yep.
and yeah, it's doing emotional damage, right? Telling this woman in this situation that she had a miscarriage
Yeah.
when she didn't. That's like incredibly damaging to a woman's psyche.
Yeah.
And again, it just never should have actually gotten to the point where it was in production, right?
Yeah.
Like this was a this, and so there's very clear. And again, she's putting her spin on this. People is not going to put her in the
Yeah.
truth zone so much, but we have to do our part.
Yeah. There was another element of it where you'd go in to do like the Theranos pinprick test, but then they would actually just do a normal blood draw and send it out to Quest Labs, which was a little fraudulent. But I think that there was a way that they could have done that in a very positive way, in the same way that, you go into one of those Amazon stores and they say it's all AI, but they still have people monitoring the cameras. You're in a Waymo, there's a human watching over and they can take over the feed if they need to, if they get confused. Oh, there's a cone that they don't understand. Human can step in. Human intervention and intervening with a more robust system on its face if you're upfront about it, doesn't seem like a problem to me. It would have been fine if I went in and said, hey, I want to get a blood draw from Theranos. And they're like, hey, we're still working on the pinprick thing. We're going to do that one, but then we're also going to do one with Quest and the gold standard, just to make sure that we don't make any mistakes here. That could have been great for the brand, actually.
Yeah, it's one of those things. If they rolled it out as a more of a trial and said, hey, you're going to go to Walgreens or CVS and you're going to get your regular blood test, and we are also going to do a prick, and you're enrolling in that, and you're not relying on that for health data. We got a question in the chat from the Chrome. He says, do you think the Theranos ordeal increased the amount of due diligence happening generally in biotech? And I would argue like probably not. I think the actual traditional deep tech biotech investors in the Valley like almost unilaterally passed on the company because of their due diligence. And I think in many cases they probably didn't even have to do that much, right? You call up a single She also was non-technical.
Yep.
So uh, having, this sort of uh, very, a non-technical founder promising that she's going to do something that that the experts or other, medical device manufacturers and scientists have been trying to do for decades and been unable to. And she says, well, if you just give me like billions of dollars, we're going to actually do it, I'm sure in some of these pitch meetings, she's like, yeah, internal testing shows that we're one-to-one with traditional, blood testing. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, there's a big question here about who was really driving the aggression at the company, her or Sunny Balwani. And during her case, her defense attorney made the what's it called, the Svengali defense, saying that he kind of pushed her to create this narrative and perpetrate this fraud.
wait,
And
Tiger did?
Tiger? What?
That was her nickname for
Oh
him.
yeah, Tiger. And so I don't know. It's an open question. Sonny has not done any interviews, but we got to hear his side of the case. But when I look at like college dropout, first time entrepreneur, I see that it's very easy for an investor or more senior person to go to them and say, hey, look, it's like actually Steve Jobs faked it till he made it. And it's okay to push the envelope a little bit.
Yeah,
and
but
it's okay.
but the end product for Theranos is not the device
Yep.
which they made.
Yep.
It is the results.
Yep.
The Tiger thing, I'll read out this quote quickly
Yeah.
because this was one of the most iconic exchanges that emerged during the legal process. This was a text message between Holmes and Sunny Balwani. It said, Holmes, or she's saying this, you are the breeze in the desert for me, my water and ocean, meant to be only together, Tiger. And Balwani replies, okay. So he was clearly locked in, at least in that moment.
So she was actually acquitted of fraud related to charges of the patient results, but she was convicted of fraud, financial fraud. And so this came down more to her representation of the progress the company was making to investors. Her prison sentence was postponed because of the pregnancy. And although the start of her prison sentence was postponed, Holmes says she still wasn't mentally prepared to serve time as a mother with 2 babies. She gave birth to her first child, William, just weeks before her fraud trial began. Evans, whom she met at a rooftop charity event in October of 2017 during the Theranos scandal, presented a silver snake ring bought at a Taylor Swift Reputation Tour concert when he proposed to her a year later. Together, they decided to start a family despite the legal jeopardy that Holmes was soon to face. I asked him 20 times if he wanted to spend his life with me, she recalls. There were a million reasons why not. Although Evans is an heir to the Evans Hotel Group, his family has not contributed to Holmes' legal defense.
Yeah, the Evans family is based in Southern California in the San Diego area and is very, very, very widely, respected and very, big part of the community down there. So I think that the entire, debacle was very, stressful in many ways, given the son's relationship with Elizabeth, which clearly they didn't, fully support if they weren't, putting up resources to help with the process.
Yeah, the timeline here is just crazy. I mean, 2017 is where the scandal goes down. I remember this breaking. John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal broke the story, and it looked bad immediately. I actually remember when I got to Silicon Valley, my co-founder David was a biotech PhD, Caltech and Harvard guy, and I was like, wait, like why aren't we using any of your skills? Like I can develop software. We're in, Y Combinator loosely, like we're in the Silicon Valley area. We should do like a blood testing company because about like blood testing. And then we looked it up and we're like, oh, there's already this company that's like ripping. Like we shouldn't compete with them. Isn't that funny? It was great.
Wow.
I was like, yeah, we should do some biotech thing because like you have a great pedigree here. We're really not using you. You're learning all this business stuff from scratch.
I always forget that David is just the ultimate PhD Chad.
Yeah.
He's just like, he's
Yeah,
just chatting out, but in a more
totally.
traditional manner.
But he was like, yeah, it's like impossible. Like there's no opportunity there. Like it's not going to happen. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like it seems like they're doing well. Like they're raising money, and he's like, doesn't matter. Like it's the science isn't real. Like
Yeah.
he clocked it
And that's
immediately.
why that's why usually, even Sequoia wrote a big check into FTX, right?
Yep.
Because you could use like, yeah, there were questions about Sam, the idea of, if you wouldn't want Brian Armstrong owning Coinbase and like actively running $1 billion hedge fund and trading against the users constantly.
It's
Like there's some
crazy.
obvious sort of ethical reasons why,
Yeah.
maybe SBF, shouldn't have been doing that, even prior to the other issues that happened. But at least in the FTX situation, there were happy FTX users. There were, you could, at least demo the product and say, okay, this is a real thing. And so that in some ways, I'm sure contributed to a bunch of the best Silicon Valley investors and crypto investors piling in capital into that company. But
Yeah.
that just didn't happen. Like the funny thing is like Rupert Murdoch is like very influential, connected, huge access to resources. But if he is seeing a biotech deal, it's very bearish, right? And
Yep.
he at the time should have been asking himself, why did the entire West Coast and fund managers representing billions of dollars of capital, pass on this company? And like, why am I getting the opportunity? But I'm sure it was his ego being like, yeah, of course I would invest in the
Yeah.
next, the Apple of healthcare, right?
Yeah.
It just makes sense.
Yeah. 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 It's also like, I mean, even the tier one Silicon Valley like tech VCs are not the go-to shops for biotech
Yeah.
growth fundraising. Like, are you familiar with the flagship pioneering model? I
No.
mean, they've just had like banger after banger. Basically, they have almost like an incubation model. So typically, it's like some PhD professor level, like 20 years of research in a particular molecule or particular technique, CRISPR or some sort of really fundamental analysis that's like almost Nobel Prize level. And then they take that
Yeah.
person and they immediately pair them with like world-class CEO, MBA type, and then they put a ton of funding behind it. They IPO the company. Moderna went through this with Stefan Bencel. It was a spin out, and I think Flagship did the deal and took that company. They were actually called the next Theranos because they were very secretive. And the CEO was saying that they're going to cure cancer and create like a vaccine for cancer, was giving TED Talks. And everyone was like, what's going on here? This company hasn't produced anything. And then the COVID vaccines happened, which are obviously controversial, but the stock ripped. And it was like a fantastic investment for Flagship.
Yeah.
And they did very well. It's funny that I don't know how prison works these days, but Ben, if you go to the second slide here, there's a photo of Elizabeth Holmes, her partner, Billy Evans, and their two children on a beach in La Jolla. And I didn't
Yeah.
know you could just go out and do photo shoots on the beach. Like it's pretty nice that you get out and,
No,
and
so
go
that was for the New
hang out.
York Times. So that had to have been during the
Oh,
not
like
not
right
now.
before she went in.
Yeah,
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 that
yeah.
must
They
be
don't they
right
don't
before.
let they don't let prisoners
Okay,
convicted.
okay. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That makes sense. And so yeah,
Can you imagine that exchange? She's talking with, whoever the
I don't know
correctional
how it
officer
works,
being like,
honestly.
yeah, well, like you don't understand. It's People Magazine.
It's People
Like,
Magazine. I
you
gotta
ever
go.
gotten an opportunity for a profile in People Magazine? Like, you gotta let me out.
Yeah.
Um,
And so the People Magazine does a good job of telling the condition that she's in, while Holmes shivers from the frigid air conditioning and picks the nuts out of a bag of trail mix. She says she has settled into the dormitory style prison's routine. Each morning she wakes up just after 5 a.m. on the grind, Jocko Willink style, eats fruit for breakfast, and then does a 40-minute daily workout, lifting weights, rowing, and running on a track. She's grinding. I
grinding.
like it. Get back in the. By 8 a.m., she's at the education building, earning 31 cents an hour as a reentry clerk, helping women slated for release write resumes and prepare to apply for tax credits and other government benefits. I bet she's pretty good at that. She also teaches
Can
French
you
classes. Pretty
can you
sick.
imagine if she spent a decade just deep in the science, James Cameron
I
style, just coming out?
100% agree. And I want that to happen. Like, if she's the real deal, publish some research, publish some blog posts, even just give us, your take on the latest science, like break down CRISPR, like study this stuff and show us that you're the real deal and that you actually understand the science, and you'll win me over. But as long as you're, just talking out the personal side, it's like, it's a lot harder to take you seriously as, hey, yes, you were really a student of the craft that you were building in, and you just got over your skis. It's like, did you ever understand the science? Because if you did, you should double down on that and come out with a banger thesis based on a ton of research. Find something that's undiscovered in the scientific research, and drop a bomb on us, Elizabeth. I'm ready. I'm listening. So many of these women don't have anyone, and once they're in here, they're forgotten. Between roll calls 5 times a day, Holmes also works as a law clerk, helping women secure compassionate release for their court cases. Holmes says she was raped at a college fraternity party and testified at her Theranos trial that she had been sexually abused and manipulated by her co-defendant Balwani. This is the Svengali defense, that he was manipulating her. And you can kind of see that in the text messages. Like, it is a sympathetic case. She claimed he controlled everything from the food she ate to her daily schedule and kept her away from her family. Kind of a, I don't know, like some cult situation. I wish that I left. I wish I had seen the abuse, or I understood it and why I didn't. And I'm finding peace with all that. If I can it can break a lot of people, and I was able to rise through it as best I can. Balwani's lawyer did not respond for a request for comment. Once a week, Holmes attends cognitive and behavioral therapy for PTSD. She also counsels inmates who are survivors, and it helps her find meaning in her incarceration. Human beings are not made to be cells. It goes so far beyond understanding. I'm trying really hard not to tear up right now. I'm trying to grow, as every moment matters. And if one person's life can be touched, trying to help them in a crisis, it matters. She's on a largely vegan diet, although she has added salmon and tuna after becoming anemic in her first year in prison. Yeah, it'd be rough to be in. She's reading a lot. She read Harry Potter, Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, and Cherry Huber's.
Is it somewhat surprising that they have salmon in a prison like this?
Why? I don't know. That doesn't seem that crazy.
I don't know. It's
you got to get protein from somewhere.
Certainly not the least expensive, fish that you can get.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
oh well. Well, she's scheduled for release in April 3rd, 2032. She'll be on the show April 4th, hopefully. We'd love to interview her and see what she's cooking up in the biotech world next. Maybe someone will acquire the Theranos IP.
No, I mean,
do something fun with it. What's your last take before we close out?
I'm very confident that we could do a Holmes prison interview episode, if it ever made sense. But we'd like to see the research first. We'd like to look at the data. We'd like to see. I think it's awesome that she's trying to help people from within the walls. But we want to see the science.
Yeah. I want to put her in the ring with a couple biotech PhDs, quiz her on a bunch of stuff, pop quiz. How does CRISPR work? See if she ever cared. If she gives some good answers, I'm willing to.
Yeah, she's saying that.
Willing to forgive.
She's saying that she's gonna, when she gets out, she's gonna fight for reform of the criminal justice system.
Yep.
She recently drafted an American Freedom Act bill, a 7-page handwritten document to bolster the presumption of innocence and change criminal procedure. This will be my life's work, says Holmes. So it sounds like she's going to abandon biotech and focus on this. And maybe she can have a positive, real positive impact there. So again, everybody's doing their best. Sometimes their best is terrible, but hopefully she can hit a good trajectory.
It is a fascinating story, though. It's captivating. I see why they made a show out of it. I see where they're making movies out of it. It is wild.